Welcome to the newest episode of The Caucus Corner. Each episode, we bring legislators and New Yorkers together to discuss some of the most pressing issues from the perspective of people of color. I am your guest host, Assemblywoman Karina Reyes, chair of the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force. For today's episode, we are talking about Hispanic Heritage Month. From September 15th to October 15th, we take time to recognize and honor the histories, cultures, and contributions of Americans whose ancestors come from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. It is both a celebration of our identities and a reminder that Hispanic Americans play an important role in the past, present, and future of this country, because our heritage is a strength, not a barrier. Before we get too deep into the weeds, let me introduce our other guest. With us today, we have Assemblywoman Amanda Septimo from the Bronx, another fellow Dominicana, and a great leader in our state legislature.
Hi, I'm Assemblymember Amanda Septimo. I represent the 84th Assembly District in the South Bronx. I'm a proud Dominican woman and I'm excited about Hispanic Heritage Month.
I wanted to start this episode off by highlighting what has been going on in our communities during Hispanic Heritage Month. Are there any particular events, initiatives, or local traditions you're especially proud of this year? Here in the Bronx, there are multiple celebrations happening throughout the county, and I'm sure that's happening throughout the state as well. It's always so fun to bring our communities together, and it's always an event that I look forward to as well.
There's Hispanic Heritage Month is always an incredible celebration where you really get to see sort of the depth and the breadth of the Latino community. One thing that I'm especially proud of that we were able to do this year, we had just last week a ceremony over at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum commemorating the installation of the Puerto Rican flag, which hadn't been there before because the museum had a policy where they would only fly the flags of nations recognized by the United Nations. And when I went there on a visit, I thought, this is not really honoring the spirit of survivors. We know that obviously Puerto Ricans are captured by the American flag, but Puerto Ricans prefer to fly the Puerto Rican flag. And so after some work with the museum, we got them to change their policy and include the flag. And so that we did a really beautiful ceremony that remembered those families, those victims. And that was really special because I think it speaks to the different cultures and the different connections that exist throughout the Latino community. And that's really what Hispanic Heritage Month is about for me at its core. Not only sort of the diversity that we have in the community, but also the really special opportunity to pause and reflect in unity.
I want to highlight a big win we had during last year's budget talks, which is the $30 million that was secured for Latinos United for Change Coalition, or Lucha. The caucus and the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force both made serious pushes for the inclusion of this. Can you highlight some of the ways this funding will support New York's Latino community?
Yeah, of course. It's funny because Lucha was actually born out of a few conversations that I'd had with some folks, but particularly the Centro for Puerto Rican and Latino Studies had done some really fascinating work around statistics related to the Latino community. And so I reached out to them and I asked them specifically to kind of bear down on more. What is the fuller picture that we can paint about New York Latinos? And out of that conversation came incredible data, including the fact that Latinos are actually the largest minority group in New York now, with about 4 million people identifying themselves as Latino, which is 1 in 5 New Yorkers throughout all of New York State. And in that data was actually a pretty horrifying story about the reality of what Latinos are facing on a daily. And in really almost every indicator, with the exception of health, Latinos are very, very far behind. And that is in terms of home ownership, in terms of education, in terms of income, et cetera. And so from that, Lucha was born, a statewide coalition of organizations coming together to say we need to invest meaningfully in the Latino community to make sure that there is funding directly dedicated to changing these outcomes. And so the coalition met over the course of probably 10 months. And in that time, came together to say, what should funding be directed to? And that is really how the sort of funding around the Lucha Initiative came to be, and also how the decision was made to say these funds are going to focus specifically on programming and education, workforce development, language access, and civic engagement, because those are all areas where Latinos are especially left behind, and where we felt as a coalition, as legislators, as folks who were working on this, that particular investment in these areas could make a measurable impact into the future so that we can start changing the story of the Latino community, instead of having the story being one of resilience through this constant sense of struggle without investment.
I mean, this investment was meant to be targeted to those smaller nonprofit groups that really struggle to get or access state funding. Those organizations that are doing the work with very little. And we were very deliberate in kind of allocating some buckets that we thought would go to the root of some of the issues that we saw in our data around Latinos. So economic development, education, workforce development were some of the things that we wanted to focus on and would like to see the organizations that access this money focus on as well.
We know that the Latino community is facing a lot of issues here in New York, and layered on top of that is everything that's happening with the federal government right now, and specifically everything that's happening with ICE and really this deportation regime that they've built. And there are reports from New York Focus that recently found that nearly 2,800 people have been arrested and detained by ICE in the first 7 months of 2025, which is a huge jump from the 500 booked in New York jails during all of last year. That's actually almost a six-fold increase. And so attorneys in New York are also saying it's hard to get in touch with ICE detainees at some jails. There's inconsistent phone access. There's all these issues. So I want to ask Assembly Member Reyes, are there specific reforms, policies, or partnerships that you're advocating for to improve transparency and access to legal support? I think I know some of them, but we'd love to hear from you about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one is important for us to understand what is within our capacity as a state to limit and to legislate, and what is beyond our control, because federal immigration enforcement, immigration enforcement is a federal issue. Um, but one of the things that we have been championing and talking about is New York for All, so that we can have in statute across the state a set of guidelines that would regulate how our state agencies and local governments interact with ICE, particularly when it comes to law enforcement and them joining the 287G program. We've seen that local law enforcement that joined this program have been using local resources and routine law enforcement activities to double down on immigration enforcement. And we know that that causes a fracture in the trust amongst our communities, and the trust between law enforcement and communities. And law enforcement has told us that this actually makes their job much more difficult. Another thing that I think we've been focusing on is making sure that there is resources for legal representation. We were able to secure some money around legal representation in the last two budgets. And I think it's important, even so now, especially now, because we've seen, like you said, a six-fold increase in immigration detention. Are there programs or local organizations that focus on improving the lives of Latinx and Hispanic New Yorkers that you would like to give a shout out? And I would think, for me in the Bronx, I think of, grassroots organizations that are doing the deep organizing work in the most marginalized communities. And I think about like Casa Yurumain, who's doing work with the Latino Garifuna community. These are Black Central American Latinos who oftentimes have to deal with the challenges of being immigrants, but also being Black. I think about communities like organizations like Justice for Families in my district, who focuses on the impacts of communities that are justice involved, particularly with children, if they have parents who are incarcerated, and they try to help families kind of navigate those systems. There are lots of organizations doing great work across the state, but those are some that I are close to me, and I want to give them a little love on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. There's probably too many to name. The Lucha Coalition has over 100 orgs doing incredible work. But some of the ones that are sort of top of mind for me always are NIMIC, the Northern Manhattan Improvement Coalition, which has a corporation, which has a sort of misnomer because they don't just do work in Northern Manhattan. They've expanded to the Bronx. As a Bronx girl, I'm deeply grateful to them. Another organization that is always top of mind for me is the Brides March, an organization that is focused on improving domestic violence outcomes, specifically in the Dominican community for Dominican women. That I think is a critical organization because there are many organizations like it around the city, but this one does a lot of work in my community that focus on pursuing domestic violence through a culturally sensitive lens. And I think that's absolutely critical. And then, of course, we have some of the standard bearers that are always doing incredible work. NICA is a great organization that we have in the Bronx that does really critical work with sort of wraparound services with vulnerable populations, specifically folks who are living in shelters, students who are in shelters, et cetera. There's too many to name, but those are some of the ones that I know are doing fabulous work every day.
That wraps up this episode of the BPHA Caucus podcast. Thank you for tuning in as we continue the conversation on the policies and issues that impact our communities. Stay connected with the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus by following us on social media and visiting our website for updates on our legislative work and upcoming events. If you found today's discussion valuable, be sure to share this episode and subscribe so you never miss an update. Until next time, let's keep pushing for progress and equity for all New Yorkers. Thanks for listening.